Hey everyone, Mowgli Legend of the Jungle has been released by Netflix and is directed by motion capture star Andy Serkis. Now, I'm going to do a little bit something different in this video. I'm going to go a little bit beyond just reviewing the film. I'm actually going to be going ahead and comparing it to 2016's Jungle Book, which is directed by Jon Favreau. And now that there have been two adaptations of Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book within the past 2 years, we can't help but sort of compare the two and really think, what are the differences, but more importantly, which one is better? Now, Disney's The Jungle Book, which came out in 2016, is a story of Mowgli, a kid who grows up in the jungle and very much struggles with his sort of life in the jungle, as well as what he could be as a man and how he struggles with that being different. Of course, the 2018 version, Mowgli, very much follows that same storyline, but Disney's follows their own sort of version based on the 1967 cartoon, whereas this one very much follows, I guess, more along the lines of the book. I can't really say since I never read it, but I do have heard actually that it's a lot more accurate to the book, even though there are still certain liberties. But Mowgli is actually a lot darker of a version than Disney's Jungle Book, and it has a lot more blood, a lot more human characters, and even a hunter, adding a different layer of complication to the story of the Jungle Book. And it's the story of that hunter who's actually hunting Shere Khan to protect a village that adds a different layer of complication and different layer of complexity to the story of the Jungle Book. It's not just about Mowgli's struggle in fighting off Shere Khan, because he is essentially a man in the jungle. This adds also a complex and sort of nice transition for Mowgli in being able to transition from the jungle world into his sort of tribe world or world of man that he encounters that's close by. The reason the hunter sort of acts as a transition is because the hunter very much works with animals. So he knows animals, he kind of treats Mowgli as an animal in the beginning when he first actually sort of encounters him. But then he sort of transitions him to becoming a human and having that human interaction. So he works kind of a duality where he's kind of an enemy, kind of a friend, but he sort of works as a bridge between the two, which I think is definitely interesting, especially since now we have a common enemy of Shere Khan, which we never really had in Disney's version. Now in Mowgli, of course, Baloo, Bagheera, Kaa are all present. However, sadly, we do lose King Louie, the orangutan from the Disney version. Now in the Disney, live action version from 2016, King Louie was actually a massive orangutan and was voiced by the brilliant Christopher Walken. We kind of lose that character completely in this version, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just really wouldn't have fit the narrative of the story, whereas that one is, because it's much more based on the Disney version and he is that sort of classic character, they kind of had to bring him into the fold. And when it comes to the CG work of the animals, compared to Disney's version, Mowgli almost appears as though it's a step backwards. It just feels like the characters are off or different. They just don't look quite right. And I think that was the liberty that Mowgli Legend of the Jungle and Netflix's version decided to take with trying to have more human-like characteristics and expressions, which completely makes sense when you're talking about motion capture. However, you tend to make look a little bit more cartoony, and it doesn't necessarily look real life. Whereas Disney's Jungle Book, which came out in 2016, they use more lifelike animals, and I say lifelike in the sense that they look like the actual animal, versus Mowgli trying to have like human eyes and expressions and things like that just completely threw off the vibe of the CG. It just made it look a lot worse than it actually probably was. There are actually a lot of beautiful visuals. I'm not saying the visuals are bad. It's just that it looks very off-putting, especially when you compare it to the 2016 version of the Jungle Book. And then, of course, there's the human at the center of this conflict, which is Mowgli himself. In Disney's adaptation, he's played by Neil Sethi, and then in Netflix adaptation, he's played by Rohan Chand. Now, this, I think, is probably the best comparison of the two films in terms of being complete equals. I felt like both actors did actually a really good job in Mowgli. They both brought different things to the character. They brought that struggle, but the way that they sort of portrayed the character was very different, but also they did it to the best of their ability. Like, I feel like that this was the most on-point thing of either movie in terms of comparison. These are the most parallel, because the kid from the Disney version, he had that sort of innocence, but he was trying to do the right thing. In this one, he has this sort of draw to the human world, but he also has that sort of obligation and to his family and to the world that he knows in the jungle. So I feel like both did a really good job of showing that balance and that duality of that conflict and struggle internally between jungle life and the man world. Both actors did a great job, and I think that that is easily the most comparable and parallel thing across the board when comparing these two movies. Where the films again begin to deviate is with the voice acting of our animal characters. Now, Disney's adaptation had, of both versions actually, had A-list casts. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But in Disney's adaptation, they had Bill Murray, Ben Kingsley, Idris Elba, Scarlett Johansson, and Christopher Walken. In the Netflix adaptation, we had Christian Bale, we had Andy Serkis, we had Cate Blanchett. There's A-lists on either side. However, I feel like that in Mowgli's version, it just felt like a lot of the characters and voice actors felt off. Benedict Cumberbatch also plays Shere Khan, which I feel like it felt off there as well. Not that the acting in Mowgli was bad. Again, it's not things that are bad, just things that felt off-putting or just didn't feel like they quite fit. And with Mowgli, they felt more like they were doing like a rough and grumble version of what Disney's version was, or like the Rudyard Kipling version is, versus the Disney version, which is a lot more playful. Like, I felt like the Kaa in Disney's version as Scarlett Johansson was a lot more of like a seductive voice that could cause you to be entranced. Whereas Cate Blanchett in Mowgli sounded a lot more like Splinter in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like, it just didn't quite sound right. At least for me anyway. Maybe a lot of people like more of that gruff, rough version because this is a darker, bloodier version of the story. But I felt like Mowgli just didn't quite have this on-par performance that the Disney version had with their cast. And I think that Disney was really able to incorporate and find those characters properly. Even in the Disney version, though, I feel like there were some characters that maybe just didn't quite fit perfectly. But it still worked. In Mowgli, it felt like they just didn't fit perfectly, and they were just going for a rougher, gruffer version of what an animal would talk like, I guess is the best way to put it. It's weird to say out loud, but when you watch the films and sort of compare the two, you kind of get an understanding of what I'm talking about. Now, the films, although they are very, very similar, they are actually vastly different. They are two completely different films done by two different studios with two, for the most part, different stories in terms of what's happening in the overall narrative of the film. So there's very vast differences, but it felt like with Mowgli, it's not a bad movie. It just feels like the children, it would be a little bit difficult to sort of understand some of the struggles that Mowgli's going through. And for parents who are watching it, it's not enough to really keep them engaged, to really say, let's sit down and watch Mowgli and not get up and do 10 other things because this movie actually is kind of boring at sometimes. So I feel like that's the struggle that Mowgli conflicts with. With the Jungle Book, I feel like you sort of capture the kids, you capture the parents with the nostalgia of the 1967 movie, or the animated movie. So I feel like there's a lot of different things happening on both that kind of are pros, but are also sort of cons, especially more on the Mowgli side. Again, it's not a bad movie. It doesn't fit quite as well as the Disney version. Maybe that's just my personal opinion on it, that it just didn't quite do so good, because I have that Disney version as my cornerstone, and I'd never read the book, so I can't really compare it to the actual novel itself. But for that overall reason, the grade that I'm going to have to give Mowgli Legend of the Jungle is the grade of a C-. To be honest, what really gave this movie a better grade than I was expecting, I actually really wanted to put it in the upper D territory in terms of grade, but because it was able to have somewhat decent visuals in terms of like the jungle itself, adding a compelling story with like the hunter and Mowgli's more interaction with the human world, as well as Mowgli himself being very much on par with the Disney version. It's what kept it in more the C territory, not quite the D territory. This movie is definitely watchable, and you should check it out if you are a fan of the Jungle Book or have read the Jungle Book, and you can actually compare it with the novel itself. But this movie, I wouldn't say rush to your Netflix streaming device and watch it now. It's not necessary. You can sort of take your time if you want to watch it over the holidays with the family, or if you have a day off and you've got a couple hours to kill and don't need to do anything, or whatever the case may be, then it's perfectly fine to watch. But I wouldn't say run to the computer or TV, whatever you have Netflix on, and watch this now. It's really not necessary. If you've seen The Jungle Book 2 years ago, you pretty much got the gist of it already. So anyway, guys, those are my thoughts on Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle, and how it compares to 2016's Disney's The Jungle Book. If you have seen Mowgli and The Jungle Book in comparison, make sure you let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Other than that, that's all I have for now, but thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.